Welcome back to another episode of Security Insights, where the best practices of cybersecurity meet the real world workplace. I'm Chris Goettl, and joining me again for this next episode is Robert Waters, who is our product marketing manager for exposure management here at Ivanti. Welcome, Robert. So we're doing a follow-up on our episode on the Verizon data breach investigations report. Let's refresh everybody on what we were talking about last episode.
Thanks, Chris. I'm excited to be back. And people may remember me from that last episode you just mentioned, where we discussed the top 3 ways attackers make their way inside an organization, as identified in the Verizon 2024 Data Breach Investigations Report, or the DBIR, as it's known for short. And they may also remember we signed off that episode by saying we were going to do a couple follow-up episodes on defending against those attack vectors. This is the first of those follow-up episodes, and today we'll be discussing how to defend against the top 2 ways that attackers initiate a breach: credentials and phishing. And let's start with phishing. So for those who may not be entirely aware or familiar, phishing is a form of social engineering where an attacker pretends to be a reputable entity, like your bank or your employer, or a reputable person, like your CEO, or perhaps the common Nigerian prince scam that we've seen for many years. And the attackers do that to deceive people into taking some sort of action, whether that be revealing sensitive information or clicking a link that will install ransomware on their device. Historically, these attacks have mostly been orchestrated via email, though in recent years, they're also increasingly carried out via SMS text message in a type of phishing attack that's known as smishing, which I think is fun to say, but not so fun to be a victim of. So, Chris, how can organizations defend against phishing, given that it's the second most common way attackers initiate breaches?
Yeah, it is quite difficult. So think about all of the different ways that we interact with technology. A phishing attempt can come through email. Well, I've got my work email. I've got potentially multiple personal emails. I can use that email from my work device, both work and personal. I can use that from a home device. I can use it from a random computer at somebody's house if I really wanted to. I can access email from my phone. So how do we protect against all forms of phishing attacks? Through email. Okay, so there's phishing attacks that can happen through SMS texts, as you mentioned. Now, Robert, I hear you are like really tight with Jeff Abbott, our CEO. I mean, every time we've got a trade show coming around, you get direct messages from him asking for more gift cards because we've run out of the show, right?
You got it. You know, I haven't had the privilege of meeting him yet, and I don't know where he got my number, but I've sent him a lot of Amazon gift cards over the past couple of years.
We've kept a lot of we've kept tabs on the number of times that Robert has gotten direct messages from Jeff versus the rest of us. I'm at a big fat 0 still. I feel slighted. I've actually met Jeff in person as opposed to Robert, but Robert apparently is on better terms with him. But so cybersecurity training is probably the most basic and also the broadest and most effective training tool and security tool we can have against phishing attempts. So this gives us the ability to educate users on all the different ways it can happen. It gives us the ability to test users. We actually, most organizations perform internal phishing training, social media attacks and other variations that could come in to make sure that users are prepared for and understand what those look like and question those things when they come around. It's not often that Microsoft reaches out to you to ask how things are going, or your cell phone provider, or your C-level executive asking you for a personal favor because they're in a bind. That's just not how the world typically works. But the main tactic of social media attacks or phishing attacks in general is to catch the target unaware. It's also a statistical game. They're not going to attack one person typically, unless it's a very well-crafted kind of sophisticated type of attack. In that case, they're going to be doing a huge amount of research on that. They're going to be taking time to craft things very specifically. but most phishing attacks are very broad, very blanket level attacks that are just generalist level, that they're just trying to get as many people to click as possible. Actually, one of the most recent forms of phishing attempts that we've seen, the TikTok attacks that have basically had a zero or a no click phishing attack that has been able to compromise well known accounts like CNN's TikTok account, Paris Hilton's TikTok account. This is all just happening recently because of a 0-day vulnerability that occurred in TikTok and allowed that clickless attack method to be used. So a direct message without even clicking on anything, you're already compromised. So phishing can be a very dangerous thing. So that's kind of the basic level of training that you can do, though, to try to counter that.
100%, Chris. All good points. I think the training is so critical just to bring that level of awareness that when something looks off, when something feels off, it probably is. And I even have, my parents who didn't grow up with the sorts of technologies we have today and didn't really use them in their working careers, but now have their iPads and their laptops and their iPhones, and they forward me screenshots often of emails they get that they think are off, and they're usually right, thankfully. And so just having that awareness has probably saved them a lot over the years. So it's a very important thing to have. That being said, even with all the training in the world, people are still bound to make mistakes. In fact, 68% of breaches researched for the 2024 Verizon DVIR involved a human element. So what can organizations do when employees inevitably fall victim to a phishing attack? Because it's going to happen. It's a matter of when, not if.
Absolutely. And I think the mobile device is probably one of the easiest to target all of us from. Yes, email is one way to do it. You can use email protection mechanisms, like if you're using Office 365. Microsoft has some built-in security mechanisms. Most organizations will supplement that with additional capabilities from like a Proofpoint or somebody else. On the mobile device, though, that's where we really need to focus more attention than most organizations do today. Think about your mobile device. Your mobile device is not going to be ransomed in a large-scale ransom attack. It's not typically going to be the thing that they get onto first and then get into the network. What they are going to do is they're going to target that user and try every way possible to compromise an identity. So there's 5 attack surfaces that basically we have to worry about. There's internal systems and infrastructure, external attack surface. There's the configuration of like cloud services and things like that. There's data, and there's identity. One of the most targeted attack surfaces on the mobile device is that identity. Phishing is trying to get you to give up a credential. So that comes in several different forms. Again, we talked about email. We talked about smishing or SMS based phishing. What we need to do is to be able to try to protect that user from those forms of attack. Now, having an MDM solution in place does a few things for you right away. One, it makes sure that the general hygiene of the device is intact. It's not jailbroken. It's up to the latest OS update. And those of you on the Apple devices especially, you know all about the rapid response updates that come out where you have little to no choice in the matter. You just need to update. Samsung or Android users in general as well, you're also used to getting fairly regular security updates for your devices. This is important. You do need to keep that up because that prevents a lot of the vulnerabilities that are going to be targeted to try to take advantage of a user and potentially get access to other things. But we still have that human element. So even if I can't exploit a vulnerability, I may be able to convince a user to click on a link, go to a site, and enter in some information. Now, think about some of the bad behavior users have with creating passwords. They may create a password that's their personal email address, and the password for that is going to be the same one on a little tiny e-commerce boutique site as they use for Amazon or Netflix or something else like that. What's to say they didn't use the same password for their corporate account? So having mobile threat defense on those corporate devices and BYOD devices that are corporate used is an ideal way to layer on that additional protection. There you could see, are there any malicious applications being introduced? Is there, many of the MTD solutions now have phishing capabilities, anti-phishing capabilities built into them as well. So you can actually protect the users against most common phishing attempts. So those two, and focusing on that mobile device, is probably the biggest gap that we can plug from a device landscape perspective.
All great points. And, that MTD and MDM combo is critical, as you mentioned, to really shore up defense against the number 2 attack vector that we see, which is phishing. Now let's move on to the number 1 way attackers initiate a breach. And you talked about a bit of this before in your previous response, but it's credentials. That's the number 1 way by far that attackers are getting into an organization. So credential attacks are pretty straightforward. They involve attackers gaining unauthorized access to accounts using legitimate credentials that they've obtained in some illegitimate way, whether through brute force attacks, credential stuffing, or even via phishing. So credentials have long been the scourge of the security world. How can organizations protect against credential attacks so perhaps one day they won't be the number 1 attack vector?
Yeah, so obviously, social or anti-phishing training and anti-phishing protection helps with that. But when that credential is compromised, we can put other protective measures in place for that. Most organizations have either MFA or two-factor authentication in place, some form of additional factor that allows you to not just rely on the password alone. Maybe that's a token. Maybe it is a push notification. In fact, most of our mobile apps now, if your banking app or any of those other types of apps you're using, you put in your information, you log in, and then it does a push notification to either a text message or your email where you have to say, yes, it's me, and approve that. That allows us to ensure that that password or that username and password is coming from the person we think it is. So all of those are forms of two-factor authentication. Now, taking that a step further, we could try to eliminate the password nearly entirely. So zero sign-on or a passwordless authentication solution is a way to try to eliminate the password from most cases where a user might be needing to enter that in. So instead of having them use a password to authenticate, they would use some form of biometrics, and then they would have a token, typically their phone, that would be the second factor. So biometrics plus phone, there is no password in the experience anymore. So if I don't have a password anymore, somebody tries to phish me and convince me to give up the password, I don't even have it. It's going to be trying to prompt me for something that I can't even give them anymore. So it eliminates things on a number of different levels and significantly kind of reduces the risk of that. Now, the other thing is, how many of your users like managing passwords? I don't hear any of them challenging or like yelling for that right now that they love their passwords, right? Nope. Yeah, we all hate passwords. We all wish we could do away with them. In fact, that's why we pretty much reuse passwords everywhere. Humans in general will, typically reuse the same passwords or a similar structure, just change a number or something like that. We can try to eliminate many of those behaviors by taking the password factor out and replacing it with additional factors that are effective but not as fallible as a password. So having strict password requirements is a good starting point, but that multi-factor authentication and more importantly, trying to graduate to that passwordless authentication experience, not only does it help secure us better, but a passwordless model actually gives the user a better overall user experience. On your phone, the phone vendors have actually tried to help us to eliminate passwords in a very significant way. For every application you use now, they can integrate with your biometrics on the phone. So I can authenticate to the application using my thumbprint. I can authenticate. I may even get a second challenge still, but that gives me a way to be able to eliminate the password from the equation. So my password may be something random, extremely complex, and I don't even know what it is anymore because I only had to enter it once. But once I did that, now my biometric is the way that I do that. Bringing a passwordless technology into the corporate level and trying to eliminate that across your broader ecosystem will help to secure you more effectively and create a better user experience.
Definitely. Great point about the user experience, because that's often the roadblock to increasing security at an organization is you fear it will impact the user experience. So if you can increase security, improve user experience at the same time, that's the cliche win-win. And I'm 100% on board the passwordless train and the biometrics train. I've had arguments with friends who say, biometrics are not infallible. They're insecure, just like passwords are. But I think in most cases, a cyber attacker is going to have an easier time figuring out my password than they are, stealing my thumb or stealing my fingerprints or my face even. So I'll take my chances there with the biometrics. On that note, I think we've covered everything we wanted to discuss today. So I'll throw it back over to you to take us home.
Thanks, Robert. And thank you all for joining us today here on Security Insights. As always, feel free to share the episode if you like what you heard. In our next episode, we'll stick with today's theme of continuing to cover how you can protect yourself against the trends that we saw in the 2024 Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. In this next episode, though, we're going to go to the third most common attack vector, which was exploitation of vulnerabilities. So there's a lot of trends right now that we're seeing that are very interesting and a little scary, but there's also a little bit of hope, a way to try to get ahead of the threat actors and the tactics they're using against us. So join us for our next episode where we'll dig deeper into that topic.